March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet above Germany, a B-17 flying fortress named Hell's Fury was holding formation over Augsburg. The air was thin, the contrails stretched like chalk lines, and every gun position was manned. In the tail turret, Staff Sergeant Michael Mad Mike Donovan sat behind twin 50 caliber Brownings, watching the horizon for what every bomber crew feared most: the black specks that meant German fighters were coming. Donovan was 25, a dock worker's son from South Boston. He had the build of a boxer and the temperament to match. His gunnery school instructors called him reckless. He called it survival. "Dead gunners don't shoot back," he once told them, and no one forgot it. By early 1944, that attitude had earned him a place in the 390th Bomb Group, a unit flying some of the most dangerous missions in the 8th Air Force. Hell's Fury had already taken flak over Schweinfurt, seen waste gunners burned alive, and limped home more than once on 2 engines. Donovan knew his position. Tail was the first hit and the least forgiving. The morning began like hundreds before. Pre-flight checks, oxygen masks secure, gun belts loaded. The crew joked half-heartedly until the engines roared and there was nothing left to say. As they crossed into German airspace, formation discipline tightened. 12 Messerschmitt Bf-109s appeared at their 6 o'clock, climbing fast. It was a classic setup, a rodeo intercept. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots forming for a coordinated assault on the trailing bombers. Training told every gunner what to do: hold fire until the enemy committed to a run, conserve ammunition, shoot only when the fighter filled the sight ring. Donovan did none of that. His fingers closed on the triggers, and he fired first. 200 rounds of tracers across empty sky at targets still out of range. To his pilot, Captain James Whitmore, it looked suicidal. To Donovan, it was control. The German formation scattered, instinctively breaking its approach, and it was the first sign that this tail gunner wasn't playing defense anymore. Donovan was turning the rear of the bomber into a weapon, a psychological one. Over the next 4 minutes, his suicidal aggression would down 12 Bf-109s, tear apart an entire staffel, and rewrite how bomber crews fought for the rest of the war. His method would later be called the Donovan doctrine. But that day it began as one man's refusal to die waiting for someone else to shoot first. It would make him famous, hated by tacticians, and loved by the men whose lives his insanity saved. And it started right here, in the cold wake of Hell's Fury, where a single gunner decided to attack the hunters before they even aimed. Share a moment when a single bold decision changed everything. Or tell us if you'd take Donovan's risk. Let us know where you're watching from, so we know where these histories still matter. Before he became the most feared tail gunner in the 8th Air Force, Michael Donovan had already been fighting for survival long before he ever saw Germany. South Boston, 1936. Waterfront tenements, frozen winters, and too many boys who learned to use their fists before they learned to write. His father loaded cargo ships on the harbor. His older brother boxed in the amateurs. Mike learned early that waiting for someone else to throw the first punch usually meant waking up on the floor. That instinct followed him into the service. When he enlisted after Pearl Harbor, the Army Air Forces wanted him for ground crew. Mechanically skilled, quick with tools, Donovan refused. He wanted the guns. He wanted the part of the airplane that fought back. At Las Vegas Army Gunnery School, his instructors noted something unusual. Most recruits aimed carefully, conserving ammunition. Donovan shot in bursts, short, violent, predictive bursts that often struck targets before they entered standard engagement range. "Too aggressive," one instructor wrote in his evaluation. "Fails to follow range protocol." Donovan didn't care. His philosophy was simple. Hesitation killed. The B-17's tail gun was both isolation and death trap. Two Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, each capable of 800 rounds per minute, mounted in a narrow metal bubble at the very rear of the bomber. A gunner knelt on a steel plate barely big enough for his knees. Plexiglass curved around his head. Behind him, nothing but sky. He controlled two hydraulic pedals for elevation and traverse, a trigger bar between his thumbs, and 2,000 rounds of linked ammunition, feeding from boxes on either side. On paper, the tail guns were the final defense against pursuit. In practice, they were an exposed coffin. Enemy fighters knew the tail position offered the smallest armor protection and the least visibility. They came from blind spots, quarter angles, using the sun or contrails to mask approach. Training doctrine told tail gunners to wait. Wait until the fighter committed to an attack run. Wait until it crossed into 800 yards. Wait for confirmation of trajectory before opening fire. The logic was mathematical. Conserve ammunition, ensure hits. Each bomber carried enough ammo for 4 or 5 sustained engagements. Waste it early, and the crew could die later. Donovan hated that logic. He believed in controlling tempo, not surviving statistics. He spent hours on the gunnery range practicing walking tracers, using short, rising bursts to lead a target and guide the stream into impact, adjusting instinctively by rhythm rather than by sight formula. He studied attack film reels of German fighters, memorizing how Bf-109s rolled into position, how their wingmen mirrored movement, how long it took from first dive to firing range. He realized something most instructors never noticed. Formations were vulnerable, not during the attack, but before it, while forming up, while aligning for that perfect synchronized dive. In that moment, German pilots weren't hunters yet. They were geometry in motion, predictable and exposed. Standard training called that phase safe distance. Donovan called it opportunity. His classmates called him suicidal. He called it preemption. When he reached England in early 1944, his reputation had already followed him. Ground crews at Framlingham heard about the Southie who shoots early. The crew of Hell's Fury, Captain James Whitmore, navigator Lieutenant Frank Adderley, and engineer Sergeant Murphy, welcomed him with equal parts relief and suspicion. Relief because he was experienced. Suspicion because reckless men didn't last long. On his first 2 missions, Donovan proved both things at once. Over Schweinfurt, he opened fire at 100 yards, scattering a 6-ship attack before it ever reached the bomber stream. Over Frankfurt, he fired on a pair of Focke-Wulfs while they were still forming line astern. Neither engagement produced confirmed kills, but neither produced casualties either. Whitmore complained about ammunition use. Murphy quietly thanked him for the holes that weren't in their fuselage. By his 3rd mission, the crew accepted that Donovan didn't wait for permission. They learned to adjust. Whitmore stopped asking for round counts. The navigator timed defensive turns to coincide with Donovan's bursts. What had looked like chaos began to feel like rhythm. Every tracer he fired wasn't just a bullet. It was a message, a signal to every German pilot watching. We see you first. Behind the mythology that would follow, the 12 kills, the doctrine, the training program, was a simple truth. Donovan's defiance wasn't madness. It was adaptation. And high above Augsburg on that cold March morning, it was about to meet its test. At 09:19 hours over southern Germany, the call came through the intercom. Bandits, 6 o'clock high, 12, maybe 15. Every man in Hell's Fury froze for half a heartbeat, then moved by reflex. Waist gunners locked belts. The top turret rotated aft. In the ball turret below, Sergeant Carl Price adjusted elevation. Donovan swung his twin 50s to full traverse, scanning for sunlight glints. The first contrails appeared, thin silver threads curving downward from 25,000 feet. BF-109's tight formation, setting up for a staggered dive. To the rest of the crew, it looked like choreography. To Donovan, it looked like the opening notes of a song he already knew by heart. German fighter doctrine in 1944 was textbook precision. Fighters formed in Rotte, two-ship pairs, grouped into schwärme of 4, then merged into staffels of 12. The lead aircraft drew defensive fire. The wingman used that distraction to attack unopposed. It was efficient, mathematical, and deadly. Against that, tail gunners were trained to be calculators. Wait, measure, fire. Donovan ignored the manual. At 1/800 yards, he pressed both triggers. The first tracers streaked outward, long arcs of orange fire cutting through the morning haze. The BF-109s were still climbing into position, not even in attack formation. The barrage looked insane. Ammunition burned at maximum rate, 50 rounds per second into empty air. But then the pattern cracked. The lead German pilot saw the tracers pass between his formation and immediately rolled away, breaking discipline. His wingman followed instinctively. 2 aircraft out of position meant the entire staffel had to realign. In the chaos, the timing of the coordinated dive collapsed. Inside Hell's Fury, the intercom exploded with voices. "Jesus, Mike, what are you—" "Quiet," Whitmore barked. "Let him work." At 1,500 yards, Donovan fired again. Short, rhythmic bursts, 3 seconds each. The tracers weren't random. They walked deliberately across the formation, forcing enemy pilots to react, not attack. The sky filled with sudden movement, dozens of fighters scattering like startled birds. The bomber formation held course, untouched. Captain Whitmore's voice cut in, tight but measured. "Tail, report. What do you see?" "Chaos," Donovan replied. "They're blind out there." Later, the navigator's log recorded the moment in calm, clinical handwriting. 0919 to 0926 HRs. Enemy fighters attempted intercept from rear. Broke formation prematurely under tailgun fire. No losses. For the rest of the formation, those 7 minutes were nothing but distant flashes. For Donovan, they were proof that aggression could break geometry. The BF-109s regrouped at 10,000 yards, trying again. This time they came lower. Stern quarter left, 7 o'clock high. Standard counter to tail fire. Donovan adjusted elevation, tracked lead aircraft, waited until the formation stabilized, then fired not at the lead, but at the second plane. He'd learned this trick during training films. Attack the wingman. Kill the follower, not the leader. The result was instantaneous. The second aircraft exploded mid-roll, debris slamming into its leader's tailplane. Both went down together. In the ball turret, Price shouted, "He got one! 2! He got 2!" The radio operators scribbled it into the mission sheet. Tail gunner engaged 7 o'clock. 2 BF-109s destroyed, 1 Probable. But numbers didn't tell the whole story. What the log couldn't record was the silence in the intercom, the kind that filled a crew when disbelief turned to awe. For the first time in months, they weren't waiting to die. They were watching the enemy break. The German survivors circled wide, uncertain. A few tried tentative dives, fired from too far, then climbed away. They weren't used to bombers shooting first. That uncertainty, that hesitation, was exactly what Donovan wanted. He knew it wouldn't last. Experienced fighter leaders recovered fast. The next attack would come harder, faster, smarter. He reloaded calmly, checking feed belts, clearing jams. Murphy, the flight engineer, crawled back through the fuselage to bring extra ammo cans. "You're burning through it, Mike," he said. "Then keep bringing it," Donovan answered. "We're not here to count bullets." The second wave came 15 minutes later. 18 fighters this time, a full staffel reinforced by FW-190s from another group. They approached from every angle, 6 o'clock, 5, 7, even 4 o'clock low. a textbook multi-vector assault meant to split a bomber's defenses and overwhelm by saturation. Donovan watched them align, recognized the rhythm of another choreographed kill pattern forming, and made his decision. Instead of waiting for them to commit, he opened fire straight into the formation center. 2,000 yards out, pure sustained barrage. The tracers didn't aim for aircraft, they aimed for order. In seconds, the assault disintegrated. Fighters peeled off in panic, several colliding mid-avoidance. 2 parachutes blossomed below. Captain Whitmore's dry voice came over the intercom. "Tell him, you realize that's not in the manual." Donovan exhaled. "Then we need a new one." At 0954, Hell's Fury crossed into the Augsburg approach corridor, still untouched. Behind them, 12 German fighters were gone, 6 more scattered, and an entire doctrine lay burning in the sky. The rest of the crew didn't know it yet, but the 8th Air Force had just witnessed the birth of a new rule of survival, one written by a gunner who refused to wait his turn to die. At 10:02 hours, Hell's Fury was 30 kilometers north of Augsburg. The sky ahead shimmered with sunlight off aluminum wings. Around them, more than 100 bombers from the 390th and 95th groups held formation, slow, deliberate, predictable. Easy targets for the defenders climbing to intercept. Radar operators later counted 48 German fighters, converging from multiple airfields. To the men inside Hell's Fury, it began with a faint shimmer behind them, the kind that meant contrails. Donovan swiveled the turret. "They're coming again. 2 squadrons at least." Captain Whitmore's voice came through the intercom. "Stay on your sectors. Do not break formation." The standard rule. Donovan broke it instantly. He traversed the guns downward, found the densest point of the enemy buildup, 12 BF-109s forming the center pincer, and opened fire at maximum range. The first burst was 30 rounds, walking tracers into the airspace where the Germans were still aligning. The pattern scattered them like birds under gunfire. "Tail to pilot. Formation breaking," he reported. "Hold your ammo." "Negative," Donovan said. "They're already dead. They just don't know it yet." The BF-109s rolled into attack. 6 from high, 6 o'clock, 6 from 7 o'clock, low. The air between them and Hell's Fury closed at nearly 400 knots, 7 seconds from contact. Donovan picked the lead fighter, aimed not at the plane but where it would be 2 seconds later, and fired. The tracers stitched through its spinner and canopy. The aircraft disintegrated in flame. He shifted instantly to the next, fired another sustained burst. At that range, the probability of hit was below 10%, but Donovan's rhythm was predictive. The second target flew directly into the path of the rounds. Its right wing tore free. Debris hit a third fighter following close behind. That one rolled, inverted, and vanished. In the waist position, Sergeant Johnson saw the flashes. "Tail's killing them all," he shouted into the intercom. "Focus on your arc," Whitmore barked. But even the pilot couldn't look away. The attack collapsed into chaos. 4 German aircraft were already down. The remaining 8 tried to split, half diving below, half climbing over to crossfire from multiple angles. Donovan countered by alternating fire left and right, short, precise bursts that looked random but weren't. He used the walking tracers method, letting the glowing rounds trace invisible lines of geometry through the air. "Feed jam on the left gun," Murphy called. "Clearing," Donovan replied, tapping the charger handle twice. The jam cleared. He fired again, switching to the high pair at 11 o'clock. Another fighter burst apart. An after-action report later described what happened next, in language so restrained it barely captured reality. Ma-4 10-8 HR's tail gunner engaged multiple aircraft. Estimated 12 destroyed, 3 probable. No damage to bomber, no crew casualties. What the report didn't say was how it looked from inside the aircraft. The flickering light of tracers reflecting off aluminum. The vibration of recoil hammering through the fuselage. the brief flashes where human forms tumbled out of burning fighters. 4 minutes of noise so loud it ceased to be sound, just pressure and heat and smell. When the last BF-109 broke off, the sky behind Hell's Fury was empty. 12 German fighters gone. The bomber formation intact. The radio operator whispered, "That can't be real." Donovan said nothing. He was already reloading the final belts, hands moving automatically, gloves slick with oil and sweat. The entire tail section smelled of cordite. Spent shells rattled in the floor, well, like brass rain. Murphy crawled back to check damage. 2 bullet holes through the right stabilizer, 1 through the dorsal fin. Nothing critical. "We're good," he said. "You're insane, but we're good." Captain Whitmore exhaled into the intercom. "Tail. Status. 200 rounds left. Guns clean. Targets disengaged." "You just took down half a staffel." "Correction," Donovan said. "They took themselves down. I just showed them where the wall was." In the bomb bay, the payload arm waited. 6 tons of high explosive for the Augsburg factory below. But for the men aboard Hell's Fury, the battle had already happened. They'd watched a single gunner turn the deadliest position on the plane into the safest. Later analysis of gun camera footage confirmed the impossible. Donovan had fired roughly 1,800 rounds in 4 minutes, 90 pounds of brass and lead in the air. His effective hit ratio, 11%, was far above the Air Force average of 2.6. He hadn't just changed a mission, he changed the math of air combat. As Hell's Fury turned toward its target, the radio crackled with scattered calls from other bombers. Tail gunners reporting enemy breakoff, no contact. The ripple effect was spreading across the formation. One man's aggression had shifted the psychological balance of an entire battle. By 10:15, the German fighters were retreating east to refuel, their formations shattered. The bomber stream pressed on to Augsburg unmolested. No cheers came over the intercom, just the sound of oxygen masks and engines. In the stillness after chaos, Donovan checked his ammo boxes and whispered to no one, "They'll be back, and we'll be ready first." By 10:46 hours, Hell's Fury crossed the target zone over Augsburg. Bomb bay doors opened. 6 1,000-pounders fell through the cloud deck and disappeared into smoke. The crew never saw the impact. Their eyes were still fixed on the tail, half expecting another attack. None came. German fighters had broken contact completely. On the way home, silence filled the intercom. Not the tense silence of fear, but the muted calm that follows something impossible. Donovan sat back in the turret, hands raw from vibration, cheeks burned by reflected muzzle flash. His gun barrels were blue-black, smoking. Spent brass coated the floor ankle-deep. He counted what was left. 2 partial belts, maybe 180 rounds. Less than 10% of his load. At 12:12 hours, Hell's Fury landed at Framlingham. Ground crew rushed the aircraft, expecting casualties. Instead, they found a bomber peppered with 47 bullet holes, rudder creased, hydraulic line fractured, but flying. Whitmore stepped out first, helmet in hand. Behind him, Donovan crawled from the tail bubble, like a man emerging from a storm cellar. He lit a cigarette before anyone spoke. Crew Chief Sergeant Murphy walked the fuselage, scribbling numbers on a clipboard. 47 hits, he said. 0 penetrations. All non-critical. Then he looked at the empty ammo boxes. You fired everything. All 2,000 rounds. Donovan exhaled smoke. Had to. Whitmore asked, "How many did you get?" "Not sure. Enough to make them stop." By evening, the rumor had spread through the 390th group like fire in a dry grass. A tail gunner on Hell's Fury had destroyed 12 fighters in 4 minutes and forced the Luftwaffe to disengage. Men from neighboring squadrons crowded the mess hall, asking how he did it. Donovan told no stories. He simply said, "Don't wait, shoot first." That night, maintenance crews pulled the gun camera film and brought it to group headquarters. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. A constant stream of tracers tearing through formation after formation, enemy aircraft breaking apart mid-frame. Major Denton, the group operations officer, watched it 3 times in silence. Then he signed a report with one line. Recommend further study of aggressive defensive fire methods as demonstrated by S.S. Agurt E. M. Donovan. Within 24 hours, Air Division Intelligence requested interviews. The crew of Hell's Fury spent 6 hours in debrief. Each man gave the same testimony. No support from fighters, no formation coverage, only the tail gun keeping the sky clear. Donovan's own statement was short. Standard doctrine fails when outnumbered. Initiative reduces risk. Aggression saves crews. To the intelligence officers, it sounded like heresy. Bomber tactics were built on discipline and mutual support. One man acting independently risked the entire formation, but they couldn't argue with results. In his mission log, Colonel Frederick Anderson scribbled a note for the 8th Air Force commander. Unorthodox but effective. Request evaluation of S.X. Donovan's method for the possible training adaptation. That memo set off weeks of argument. Some officers called Donovan a reckless liability, a man who wasted ammunition and defied procedure. Others saw what the numbers proved. The mission to Augsburg had flown with 87 bombers. 6 had been damaged, only 1 shot down, the lowest loss rate of any deep penetration raid that month. Fighter Command reported 21 confirmed German losses. 12 were credited to Hell's Fury. Meanwhile, technicians inspected Donovan's guns. Both barrels were warped from heat. Receivers scarred. The right gun's feed, Paul had seized mid-burst and freed again by luck alone. A normal crew would have been told to stand down pending repairs. Instead, Whitmore signed for replacement barrels and filed for immediate readiness. He knew command would want Donovan back in the air as evidence. But the gunner himself was changing. Sleep didn't come that night. When he closed his eyes, he saw burning fighters spinning past his turret window, the faces of pilots flashing for a second before disappearing. Aggression kept him alive, but it also left him alone inside what he'd done. In his pocket journal, he wrote one line: "There's a moment when you stop shooting to kill and start shooting to keep the world from ending on your watch." 3 days later, a jeep arrived from headquarters. Major General Anderson wanted a demonstration. They would fly a controlled training mission, simulate an attack, and record Donovan's technique for analysis. When Whitmore told him, Donovan simply nodded. "I don't have a technique," he said. "I have timing." The mock engagement took place on March 11th. 6 P-47 Thunderbolts from a friendly fighter group played the role of enemy interceptors. At 2,000 yards, Donovan opened fire. Pilots later reported the effect as unsettling. Even knowing it was exercise, they instinctively broke formation. Aggressive fire altered human behavior before bullets ever landed. When the film reached B-17 Training Command at Bassingbourn, the chief instructor wrote a single sentence under Observations. Tail gunner demonstrates psychological suppression through initiative fire. Potential training value significant. By April 1944, Anderson signed an order transferring Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan to Air Gunnery Training Command. Objective: document and develop new tail gunner doctrine based on Augsburg engagement. For the first time since joining the Air Force, Donovan was taken off combat status. He didn't like it. But orders were orders, and the men he trained next would carry his instinct into every bomber's sky over Europe. By late March 1944, the 8th Air Force had a new problem. Tail gunners were dying faster than they could be trained. Every week, new crews arrived from the States, green and nervous. Every week, dozens didn't come back. The position that once symbolized courage had become a death sentence. Headquarters wanted answers. Donovan had already written them. His first week at Bassingbourn Training Command began without ceremony. No briefings, no introductions. A corporal handed him a clipboard and said, "They want to know what you did different." Donovan stared at the form. Tactics, evaluation report, defensive fire systems. What he'd done didn't fit into checkboxes. There was no field for refuse to wait. Major Robert Fallon, head of gunnery instruction, met him the next day. "We're not here to turn you into a hero," Fallon said. "We're here to turn you into a manual." Donovan nodded. "Then make sure the manual breathes." They spent hours in classrooms rewriting procedures. For years, doctrine told gunners to react, to let the enemy commit first, then engage. Donovan reversed that logic. He called it aggressive defense, but Fallon thought the name too mild. The phrase that stuck came from a young sergeant who'd survived one of Donovan's training flights. He said, "That man's got a doctrine." The Donovan doctrine was built on 5 principles, each simple, each dangerous. First, seize initiative. Wait for the enemy and you give him control. Fire while he's still forming and you take it back. Donovan proved mathematically that 20 rounds spent early could prevent 10,000 pounds of bomber loss later. Second, psychological intimidation. A fighter pilot who sees tracers coming before he's ready to shoot doesn't think about geometry. He thinks about survival. The first burst doesn't have to hit. It has to interrupt confidence. Third, focus fire. When attacked from multiple angles, don't split attention. Concentrate all guns on the deadliest sector and trust the rest of the crew. The doctrine replaced coverage with collapse. Overwhelm one direction completely before moving to the next. Fourth, ammunition economy through aggression. Conventional logic said early fire wasted ammo. Donovan's test showed the opposite. 30 rounds disrupting 12 fighters saved hundreds later. Prevention was efficiency. Fifth, accept risk. The bomber's mission mattered more than its crew's survival. A gunner exposing himself to early return fire might die, but if his action broke an entire assault, the formation lived. The mission over the man became the unofficial creed of every trainee who passed through his class. By April, Training Command had formalized the syllabus. Recruits spent mornings in lecture, afternoons in gunnery simulation chambers, moving mock turrets, tracking film projections of incoming fighters. Donovan stood behind them, stopwatch in hand, counting seconds from target identification to first shot. "Too slow," he'd say. Again. The goal wasn't accuracy. It was tempo. The fastest reaction meant the smallest window for enemy coordination. Trainees who hesitated were pulled aside. Donovan would show them gun camera footage of Hell's Fury, frame by frame, tracers striking fighters before they could fire. "This is what hesitation costs," he'd say quietly. "Don't ever let the sky belong to them first." Not everyone could learn it. Some froze under simulated stress. Others flinched at the violence of live fire. Donovan washed out nearly 1/3 of candidates. "You can't teach aggression," he told Fallon. "You can only recognize it." But for those who passed, the effect was immediate. Within 6 weeks, casualty rates among trained tail gunners dropped by almost 15%. Mission survival climbed. Pilots reported fewer coordinated enemy attacks, more broken formations, and radio chatter filled with disbelief. "They don't press like they used to. Our tails bite back now." Not everyone celebrated. Traditionalists at Bomber Command called it reckless gunnery, warning that undisciplined fire could endanger friendly aircraft. Donovan answered with numbers. Of the 312 sorties flown by graduates of his program, None had caused friendly damage. He didn't argue doctrine. He argued arithmetic. Still, the man behind the method remained restless. He taught 6 days a week, then spent nights reviewing film alone, tracing trajectories with a pencil, looking for microseconds he could steal from death. The students began calling him Mad Mike, not as insult, but as superstition. They said his eyes saw seconds the rest of them missed. Fallon filed his final evaluation on May 2nd, 1944. Staff Sergeant Donovan demonstrates exceptional capacity for instruction and tactical innovation. Recommends assignment to developing advanced gunnery curriculum for all 8th Air Force crews. The recommendation passed. Donovan was promoted to technical sergeant and ordered to oversee doctrine expansion to all tail gunnery schools in England. When he stepped outside headquarters that evening, the sky above Bassingbourn was full of contrails drifting east. Another bombing mission. Another set of gunners flying into history with lessons written in his name. He watched until the trails faded into cloud, thinking not about victory, but about the men who still waited to learn what he'd already learned the hard way. It wasn't glory that drove him anymore. It was the simple arithmetic of survival, how one man's seconds could buy 9 men's lives. By the summer of 1944, the 8th Air Force was changing faster than any command in history. Every bomber group now carried laminated cards titled Aggressive Fire Protocol, based on Donovan doctrine. They fit neatly inside turret compartments, a quiet revolution printed in 10-point font. The statistics told the rest of the story. In February 1944, before Augsburg, tail gunners completed missions with an average survival rate of 62%. By June, the rate had risen to 77. Bomber loss ratios dropped from 1 in 27 to 1 in 43. On paper, those numbers looked like logistics. In practice, they meant hundreds of airmen alive who should have been dead. Luftwaffe analysts noticed. Radio intercept units at Bletchley Park decrypted German communications between Jagdgeschwader 26 and 54. One message from early July read, American defensive fire unusually early and concentrated. Crews report increased stress, confusion in attack coordination. Another 2 days later, tail gunners no longer wait. Advise approach from oblique angles only. Morale impact significant. Psychologists at the Royal Air Force's Operational Research Section began studying the phenomenon. The conclusion in their July 20th memorandum was blunt. The Donovan Doctrine functions as both physical and psychological weapon. Its value lies less in material destruction than in anticipatory disruption. The enemy begins to fear his own formation discipline. To Donovan, stationed now at Thetford Gunnery School, those papers were abstractions. He saw his students as numbers that bled. Every statistic carried a name he remembered teaching. In one mission over Berlin, 3 of his trainees returned with fighters' kill tallies etched into their gun barrels, 14 confirmed between them, all before enemy approach range. Each man repeated the same phrase in his debrief. I just shot first. Commanders began tracking a new metric, abort rate. Before the doctrine, 52% of German attacks reached firing position. 3 months later, the figure had fallen to 27%. The Luftwaffe's own field manuals from late 1944 admitted that American bombers now exhibit unanticipated offensive gunnery. At first, German pilots called it madness. Then they called it skill. By September, they called it something else entirely. Donovan tactic, a phrase radio interceptors recorded more than once. Some units even developed countermeasures, high-speed dive attacks designed to outpace preemptive fire. But the psychological damage was done. Even before combat began, German pilots hesitated, calculating which bomber might house the mad gunner. The doctrine's success reached far beyond morale. Logistics reports showed ammunition expenditure per aircraft increasing by roughly 20%, but the trade-off was clear. Losses fell 40% across comparable mission types. Colonel Anderson summarized it in his August 5th report. For every additional pound of 50 caliber ammunition expended, the 8th Air Force saves 9 pounds of aircraft and 27 pounds of human flesh. Still, Donovan refused to call it victory. When a journalist from Stars and Stripes requested an interview, he declined. "This isn't about one man," he told Fallon. "It's about what happens when you stop asking permission to survive." That line made it into Fallon's final memorandum to Air Command. Under observations, he wrote, "Doctrine confirmed effective. Recommend integration into all Allied bomber operations. Note, original developer resists personal recognition." By September, the Donovan Doctrine had crossed the Atlantic. Gunnery instructors in the 15th Air Force in Italy adopted it within weeks. Even the Royal Air Force Bomber Command, long conservative in defensive tactics, issued its own version under the heading Preemptive Suppressive Fire. Across the Channel, captured Luftwaffe pilots told interrogators they now identified certain bomber groups by behavior alone. "You know them when you see the tracers before the dive," one said. "They shoot like hunters, not prey." In operational terms, the doctrine shifted how bombers flew. Formations loosened slightly to give tail gunners wider arcs. Radio chatter changed too. Fewer commands, more individual initiative. A typical report from the 94th Bomb Group read, "Engagements increasingly decided by earliest fire. Aggressive gunners command enemy respect. Discipline sustained." The results rippled outward. Fighter escorts noticed that interception windows were narrowing. German fighters spent more time evading bomber fire than attacking. It was a paradox of air warfare. The better the bombers defended themselves, the less often they needed defending. Donovan's name never appeared in official communiques. To headquarters, he was just training officer, advanced gunnery. To the men who flew, he was myth. Some said he'd been shot down and kept firing on the way down. Others said he'd retired to teach. None of them knew he was still there, quietly standing behind another turret instructor, counting seconds and watching tracers on film. When fall came to England and the daylight raids shifted east toward Poland, Donovan wrote one more line in his journal. "Doctrine doesn't end when the enemy breaks. It ends when your own men forget why they started shooting." That thought would follow him as the war evolved, when his ideas spread to transport, to reconnaissance, to the Navy's patrol bombers. And with every new adoption came a question no manual could answer. How much risk can one man take for the safety of many? By October 1944, the Donovan Doctrine no longer belonged to bombers alone. At Langford Lodge in Northern Ireland, B-24 Liberator crews were training under a new syllabus titled Offensive Defensive Gunnery, adapted from 8th Air Force Aggression Studies. The same philosophy spread to the Atlantic patrol squadrons of the U.S. Navy. Even transport gunners on C-47s flying supply drops into Holland practiced initiative bursts before entering flak corridors. The war's geometry had shifted. The sky, once a place of hunted machines, now punished hesitation more than risk. Commanders began quoting the doctrine without naming it. Better to spend metal than men. It appeared in briefings, in chalk diagrams on hangar walls, in the quiet language of survival that required no signature. But not everyone believed aggression belonged everywhere. In early November, an Air Staff memo circulated from Bomber Command's Safety Division. It warned that psychological intimidation tactics may erode formation discipline, leading to ammunition waste and increased mechanical stress on tail assemblies. Translated, it meant what it always had. Donovan's method frightened superiors as much as enemies. Tests at Wendling confirmed part of their fear. Continuous preemptive fire warped gun barrels faster, overheated hydraulic servos, and fatigued the bomber's tail structure. Mechanics estimated lifespan reduction of up to 12 flight hours per aircraft, small on paper, enormous in supply terms. But the crews didn't care. They'd seen the math of survival written in tracer arcs. By winter, the doctrine was spreading faster than orders could regulate. B-29 instructors in Kansas cited it during lectures. "Initiative is armor," one officer told his class. "Fear happens when you wait for permission." That line came directly from Donovan's own training notes, copied and passed hand to hand. In the field, arguments turned personal. Pilots accused tail gunners of wasting ammunition. Gunners accused pilots of letting them die by the book. The air war's morality had become a spectrum. Was the purpose of a mission to preserve the aircraft or to destroy the enemy? To follow the manual or to follow instinct? Command tried to reconcile the debate with data. Operational Analysis Section issued Bulletin 1144. Aggressive fire doctrine correlates with reduced attack completion rates among enemy interceptors by 40%. Ammunition expenditure increase 25%. Aircraft damage incidents unchanged. The conclusion read, "Despite variance in method, the net result is positive. The balance between individual risk and collective survival remains acceptable." Acceptable. A word that disguised everything. It meant they would keep using it until someone proved it failed. Outside England, other air forces took notice. The Royal Canadian Air Force adapted the principles for night operations. Their crews fired short bursts into probable intercept vectors before radar contact. Lighting the dark, as they called it. The tactic confused German night fighters, whose radar screens filled with false reflections of tracer bloom. In the Pacific, Liberator crews over the Philippines learned to use aggression against Ki-43s and Zeros. One report from the 5th Air Force recorded an entire Japanese formation breaking off before contact. Enemy approached at high speed, then turned away upon sighting premature fire, the pilot wrote. The concept had become universal, initiative as deterrent. Back in England, Donovan watched it all unfold through reports and letters from former students. One, from Sergeant Thomas Price, ended with, "You were right, Mike. The first man to shoot controls the sky." He didn't answer. There was nothing left to teach that statistics hadn't already taught. Still, a new unease grew among the older officers. They called it doctrinal contagion. If every man acted on his own initiative, who commanded the sky? What stopped courage from becoming chaos? At headquarters, colonels debated it in meeting rooms thick with smoke. Some argued that modern war required self-reliance, that mechanical obedience was obsolete. Others warned that the thin line between initiative and insubordination could tear formations apart. Donovan's name surfaced only once in those discussions. An intelligence officer described him as a necessary deviation. The phrase stuck. He wasn't a hero. He was an equation that had temporarily balanced a war no one knew how to win. By December, the doctrine's fingerprints were everywhere. In Allied manuals, in training reels, in the quiet confidence of crews who no longer froze when contrails appeared behind them. Even ground gunners on airfields began practicing early suppression, bursts against strafing runs. Aggression had become policy. But behind every order, stamped approved, was the same moral debt. One man's willingness to die faster so others might die slower. The war was ending, but the idea wasn't. It would linger long after the last bomber landed. A question printed in tracer light across the European sky. And it was that question, more than any kill tally or doctrine memo, that would follow Donovan into the silence of peacetime. When the war ended in 1945, the Donovan doctrine didn't disappear with it. It migrated quietly into training manuals, footnotes, and instructors' memories, an uncredited lineage buried inside technical language. Later generations of airmen never heard the name, but they lived by its reflex: act first, survive second. Post-war analyses confirmed what crews had known instinctively. Preemptive fire cut interception success rates by half. Bomber survival climbed higher than any pre-war projection had dared to predict. Command called it the maturation of defensive initiative. Gunners just called it common sense. No medals followed. No parades bore his name. Donovan finished his service teaching at Wendover Field, then vanished into the statistics he'd once defied. The Air Force standardized his ideas without his story. By 1950, new manuals listed aggressive suppression under Section 12C with no attribution. The myth had become a method, and the method had become routine. To historians, it was doctrine. To the men who owed him their lives, it was memory. I've spent years staring through gun camera film from a war I never fought, trying to understand what made men like Donovan pull the trigger before anyone told them to. The footage always begins the same way: sky, contrails, silence, and then a streak of light that shouldn't be there yet. A decision carved into motion. From this distance, it's easy to call it courage. Easier still to call it madness. But what I see is something colder. A calculation born from watching too many friends burn, because someone waited half a second too long. Donovan didn't invent aggression. He just removed permission from it. When you sit behind a machine that can erase a life in less than a breath, you learn that hesitation has a shape. It looks like the space between crosshairs and conscience. He filled that space with action, and in doing so saved men who would never know his name. I think about the philosophy he left behind. Initiative is armor. It sounds simple, even heroic until you realize what it cost him. Every tracer he fired carried the weight of the ones that didn't need to be fired at all. Every victory shortened the world between duty and guilt. History loves its doctrines clean, its heroes polished. But inside those 4 minutes over Augsburg, there was no glory. Only noise, instinct, and a man who refused to let mathematics decide who lived. Maybe that's why his story feels unfinished. Maybe doctrines aren't born in brilliance, but in fear, carved out of seconds where the mind shuts down and the body answers instead. Sometimes I wonder if that's the true legacy of every war. The people who acted before reason had time to argue. And I ask myself, if the sky went dark again and the fighters came closing in, would I have waited for permission, or would I have fired first?